Hello. Well, we are back for a special end of the year podcast episode, and yeah, what an end of the year it has been. The government is in crisis. Trump is threatening, making all sorts of threats, and yeah, here we are. So with me today to discuss this, we have Marco LaGrotta, an activist with the Revolutionary Communist Party. My name is Joel Bergman. And yeah, we are going to be discussing what is going on. Why is the government in crisis? What are they going to do about Trump? Trump's tariffs? Um, yeah, and what lies on the horizon? So yeah, welcome, Marco.
Hey,
So I guess maybe just to start, we can start with the question of, yeah, how did we get here? I don't know if you want to you want to start on that.
I think it's a long time coming. I mean, a lot of people are gonna want to blame this on Trump. If it
Yeah,
weren't for Trump, we wouldn't be in this situation. I think that would be an oversimplification. Obviously, Trump has, in a way, precipitated this crisis, but it didn't create the crisis. It was a long time coming, and I think it goes back to the situation we're seeing in the country that Trudeau's now been in power for what, close to a decade.
yeah,
And what's been the result? 10 years on, the country's in the absolute pits. I was reading about the job market today. In Toronto, youth unemployment is notching up over 15%. People can't find work. The housing market's worse than it's ever been. The cities are falling apart. We got a drug crisis. We've got an infrastructure crisis. We've got a homelessness crisis. And Trudeau hasn't been able to solve it. He talks a good game like any liberal does, but he hasn't been able to solve it. And I think that's putting immense pressure on the government. And now we're seeing what we see in every major crisis, which is, splits beginning to happen at the top. And, most recently with the departure of Chrystia Freeland, who was, deputy prime minister. A lot of people looked at those two as being thick as thieves, but
yeah.
clearly the crisis has reached such a point that it's at a breaking point.
Yeah, so for those of you who have been living under a rock, who maybe don't know, Chrystia Freeland, yeah, was the deputy prime minister, the finance minister, basically like the vice president. Resigned on Monday ahead of a financial update that she was supposed to read out that would have showed the deficit grow by $20 billion. She also criticized Trudeau for his costly political gimmicks, in clear reference to the GST holiday, 2-month GST holiday, and the $250 amount that he's giving to 18 million Canadians next year. Yeah, and she was basically saying he's not up to the job to fight against Trump. So yeah, this immediately plunged the government into crisis, and as you've mentioned, it's already a difficult situation. After almost 10 years, the government has solved none of the pressing problems facing Canadians, facing working class Canadians. There's a rental crisis. People can't afford a place to live. Price of basic necessities has gone up. And none of the measures that they've implemented have really done much to change anything, and everybody knows that. They've consequently plummeted in the polls, as if almost foreshadowing what is to come. On the same day Freeland resigned, there was a by-election in British Columbia, and they were absolutely clobbered.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Conservatives got 67% of the vote. So yeah, there's all these questions, and then in this context, there's rats fleeing the sinking ship.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of Liberal MPs saying they're not going to run again. There's ministers that have been stepping down. Freeland's not the first one. And yeah, I think there's 19 Liberal MPs who've publicly called him to step down.
Mm-hmm.
I think behind the scenes, there's estimates that could be upwards of 70 something,
Mm-hmm.
probably at least 50 out of the 153 Liberal MPs. So basically, you have an open revolt inside the Liberal Party against Justin Trudeau.
Mm-hmm.
This is rather unprecedented situation. Um, yes, and of course, the big thing on the horizon here is Donald Trump. He will be inaugurated on January 20th.
Mm-hmm.
He's making all sorts of threats. He came out a few weeks ago now, almost a month ago, I think it was, threatening a 25% tariff
Mm-hmm.
on all goods, all Canadian goods going to the US. This sent the government into panic. Trudeau, that week, flew to Mar-a-Lago to meet
Mm-hmm.
with him, posted glowing photos about how much of a friends they are and stuff. And Trump's response was to goad Trudeau online, referring to him as the governor of the great state of Canada, basically threatening to annex Canada into a state. So it doesn't seem like Trudeau's strategy to deal with Trump has actually worked, and there's a certain panic here in capitalist, in bourgeois circles, and in government circles, of all the parties of like, what do we do? What do we do?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we've talked a little bit about Trump already. Why don't we just tackle the question directly,
Mm-hmm.
the effect that Trump is having? Uh,
Yeah.
what? Yeah, I guess what? Yeah, he was reelected on November 6th, but yeah, what effect is this having on Canadian politics? You want to
Yeah.
say a few words?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, start with that meeting at Mar-a-Lago. It was really funny how that came together, and I think that meeting was telling in a lot of ways about the relationship between the U.S. and Canada. Because first of all, Trudeau was in a rush to get down there.
Yeah.
They sent the government into a panic. He goes there, and you can kind of imagine him, kind of on his hands and knees, sort of, kissing the ring of Trump, pleading, please, please don't bring in these tariffs. But from all the reports we got from that meeting, Trump was cool as a cucumber. You could tell they're a lot more panicked in Canada than they are in the United States. Apparently, Trump spent a good part of the time. He had his iPad connected to the speaker system, and he was playing songs every few minutes. I think Pavarotti, I think a song from Cats. Anyway, you get the impression of a man who's really unfazed. But then Trudeau and his government being in an absolute state of panic, and I think they have every right to be, because you look at, take the question of trade. Let's say he does bring in the 25% tariffs. What would that mean? I mean, Canada and the US are probably two of the most economically integrated countries in the world. I think the most recent figure is 77% of the exports go from Canada to the United States. You slap a 25% tariff on that, you're talking about an immediate recession. There's no question.
Yeah.
In the Canadian economy.
If not a depression. Yeah.
If not a depression.
Yeah.
And what that means is factories are going to be closing down. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people are going to be laid off. It's going to send the economy into an absolute tailspin. Because obviously in Canada we like to brag. But the fact is, we're dealing with the world's economic superpower here. You can talk a big game, but when the economy next door is more than 10 times your size, the population is 10 times your size, there's not a lot of room for maneuver. So either you kiss the ring and do as he says, or he's going to blow your economy to smithereens. That's the real situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that explains the panic. And they have reason to panic.
Yeah, so what are they doing then? What is the government doing in response to the Trump threat, other than just panic?
Mm-hmm.
Or what are other Canadian politicians doing?
Well, I think, the word groveling comes to mind.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit different. We were talking about this the other day. The first time around, they were a bit more combative. You remember that with NAFTA? They had the whole Team Canada approach.
Yeah, they were criticizing him openly. Yeah.
Yeah, retaliatory tariffs. They were talking a big, big game. Not so this time around. Not so this time around. And of course, the reason being that the government is 100 times weaker than it was the last time. So they've chosen to do as Trump says.
And Trump's a lot stronger this time. He's captured the Republican Party.
Yeah.
He decisively won the election. He's emboldened. Yeah.
It's a huge mandate. I mean, I'm sure the Democrats don't want to accept that. But the fact is, obviously, we're not fans of Trump.
Yeah.
But he got the Supreme Court, he's got the Congress, he's got the Senate, and he got a huge mandate. He won the popular vote. That's in the US. In Canada, you've got probably one of the most unpopular prime ministers in Canadian history. So they've had to kiss the ring. I mean,
Yeah, I saw one poll that showed that 23% of Canadians, only 23%, have a favorable view of Trudeau. 26% of Canadians now have a favorable view of Trump.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
astounding. That's an astounding reversal from a handful of years ago when it was Trudeau had approval ratings over 50%, and a very small percentage of Canadians like Trump. This has completely changed situation.
And that's why he can come out and say, Canada should become the 51st state.
Yeah.
Started calling him Governor Justin Trudeau. But the fact is Trudeau is weak. That's why Trump can get away with that.
Yeah.
But they're groveling. I mean,
but what is Trump saying that he wants Canada to do specifically?
well, he's talked about the border.
Yeah.
I think that's what he mentioned in his Truth Social post. Stop the flow of fentanyl, stop the flow of illegal immigrants from the northern border. Now, you actually look at the facts and figures. Obviously, there are some of both of these things, but negligible.
Yeah.
When you really look at the statistics, it's a negligible thing. But even so, I mean, Trump made that post about 2 weeks ago. They just announced the other day, the Canadian government, I think it was in the fiscal update,
Yep.
that Freeland was supposed to do, but obviously she was gone by that time.
Yeah.
So she didn't deliver it. But one of the things they announced was they're going to pump another $1.3 billion into border security.
Yeah.
Even though it's a negligible, the fentanyl. I mean, I think it was something like 4 pounds of fentanyl last year or something like that. I don't know. I've never tried fentanyl, but I don't think that's a lot of fentanyl.
But this is just Trump has mastered the art of redirection.
Mm-hmm.
So people are mad in the U.S., workers are mad, and he directs their attention away from blaming the capitalist system and the ruling class and towards, you remember the first time it was Muslims.
Yeah.
There's the Mexican criminals that are coming over.
Yeah.
This time around it's fentanyl, and now he's doing it to Canada, claiming that there's illegal immigrants coming over the border from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So this is essentially what he's doing. He's trying to find any way to blame something else for the problem.
Mm-hmm. And in private, these Canadian politicians say, oh, it's absolutely ridiculous. In public, they've met every single one of his demands.
Yeah, they're agreeing with him.
Thus far, they're going to send drones to the border. They're going to send helicopters to the border.
The astonishing thing is, across the political spectrum, all the premiers, whether they're NDP, Conservative, or Liberal, actually with the exception of Doug Ford, who's been a bit more...
Yeah.
Who claims that he'll cut off energy exports to the U.S. in retaliation. They're all agreeing with Donald Trump on the border security issue, which just shows the relationship. Doug Ford is under massive pressure to reverse his threat because, Canada is we said it. He said it. America is the world superpower. Canada needs the U.S. more than the U.S. needs Canada. Trump's response to Doug Ford was, fine, go ahead. It's not going to affect them that much. The U.S., it's like 0.3% of U.S. energy is from Ontario. So they're not particularly worried about that. They could retaliate with things that would be far more damaging to the Canadian or the Ontario economy.
I think one of those things is, the Enbridge pipeline passes through, I believe it's Michigan, into Ontario. And so they could easily, if Doug Ford were to shut off energy exports, they could easily hit back with far more power than anything Canada could muster. But just a point you made about all the different politicians, taking this craven attitude towards Trump, that includes the NDP.
Yeah.
Jagmeet Singh came out, this was now, I think, a week ago, and said, we got to put 1,000 more troops on the border.
Yeah.
But then, of course, he reframed it by saying, it's because there's guns coming from the United States into Canada. That's why we need to do it.
That's ridiculous.
Obviously, it's clear that he's buckling before Trump. Wabkinu, Manitoba. Uh, I read that I think it's their conservation officers. They're now going to redeploy to
Okay.
patrol the border with the
Right.
United States. So even the NDP, which is supposed to be a left-wing party,
Right.
is taking the exact same approach.
Yeah, exactly. So you have this kind of groveling of the political establishment in Canada at the
Mm-hmm.
feet of Trump. Even Pierre Poilievre, who's the Conservative Party leader, who initially said that he would fight fire with fire, has actually stopped short of saying he won't. He's not going to do counter tariffs. He basically said, "Oh, the U.S. is the big superpower. We gotta accept the reality." Basically, so we'll see what he does, but he hasn't proposed anything like Doug Ford is doing, for example. So
Mm-hmm.
there seems to be, and actually, Pierre Poilievre just re-emphasized that they needed to secure the border, which is a capitulation to Trump's uh, fantasy demand of
Well, I
this
think,
of this
yeah.
unsecure border.
Well, I
Whatever.
think this guy Pierre must be, shaking in his boots right now because the fact is he probably will get
Yeah.
in the next election, and now he's going to be the one who has to face off against Trump.
Yeah.
And the fact is, he's going to be in the same position between a rock and a hard place that Trudeau is in now. And the fact is, I heard him on, I think it was City TV or City News, one of these programs this morning. And the reporter asked him, what are you going to do to combat Trump? And this guy, he's like, those like pull string dolls you had as a kid that got a few,
The slogans.
yeah, program lines. And he said, well, I'm going to cut the carbon tax. And you're sitting there thinking, what on earth is that going to do?
It's a minuscule, inconsequential tax.
And what does Trump care about the Canadian carbon tax? But it's almost as this guy who's got a few pre-programmed lines.
Yeah.
The fact is, he knows he's screwed. He's going to be in the same dire position that Trudeau's in from day one.
Yeah, so the effects that this will have on Canada, whether or not the 25% tariff gets introduced,
Mm-hmm.
will be disastrous. So I think either way, the Canadian government, whoever's in power, is rather screwed. Canada is a small fish in a big pond. And yeah, like almost 80% of our exports go to one market who is now threatening Canada. So yeah, things do not look good for Canadian capitalism already. The economy is teetering on the edge of a recession. There is an ongoing productivity crisis, which we have covered. You can read at marxist.ca. We have analysis on that. There's an ongoing productivity crisis, which has actually not only has the Canadian economy not been advancing, it has been contracting in labor productivity for the last 5 years, largely due to the fact that there's been a bit of an exodus of investment because there's a crisis of global capitalism, and there's an overproduction. There's a crisis of overproduction. That means that capital is not looking to invest in any market. It's only looking to invest in the absolutely most profitable markets. And the United States market, especially after the reforms that Trump put in the first time around, where he lowered the corporate tax rate, there's been various governors in some states that have just utterly smashed the trade unions. This is a much more attractive field for investment than Canada is, with stronger unions, more regulation, higher corporate tax rate. So the Trump coming in at this moment and threatening tariffs and whatnot does not bode well for the Canadian economy, and as we've mentioned already, could push things over the edge into a economic catastrophe, to be honest. But yeah, maybe let's go back to first the political situation. So the government's in crisis. The second in command has resigned, criticizing Trudeau. Trudeau's just today reshuffled the cabinet, bringing up a lot of backbenchers.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of questions about what he's going to do. Like we already mentioned, there's a lot of Liberal MPs that have called on him to resign. The Toronto Star, which is the most widely read newspaper in Canada and a staunchly Liberal paper, is now openly calling for him to step down. He hasn't done so yet. The Conservative Party is calling on him to dissolve Parliament and call for early elections. That's not surprising. They've been doing that for well over a year.
Mm-hmm.
But now the Bloc Québécois
Mm-hmm.
are basically saying they will vote no confidence in the government. And just today, just this morning, finally, after a long time of equivocating about it, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have said that they will vote no confidence in the Liberal government
Mm-hmm.
at the first opportunity. So, yeah, I guess what happens next? We already mentioned you have Pierre Poilievre waiting in the wings.
Mm-hmm.
Just in pretty much exactly a month, Donald Trump will be sworn into power
Mm-hmm.
in the U.S. It looks like things are not headed in a good direction. We have a government that's a minority government. They're paralyzed,
Mm-hmm.
and they got a hated leader who's barely hanging on. Well, what are the options do they have? Like, what's going to happen in 2025? I guess maybe we can start with that question.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of those situations where either way they're screwed. I mean, you look at Trudeau. First of all, he's more and more becoming an island unto himself.
Yeah.
That the government is more and more becoming a smaller and smaller circle around the figure of Justin Trudeau, especially since Freeland left. Like he now put in Dominic LeBlanc into the finance portfolio.
Yep.
Who, yeah, we were talking about this earlier. It used to be he used to be his
He's a
babysitter,
yeah.
a close family friend, and it shows the desperation and how we're kind of in the dying days of the Trudeau government that he can't trust anybody anymore. He's forced to literally appoint, friends of the family
Yep.
to senior positions in the government. So more and more and more, it's a very isolated regime and a self-serving regime. I think this also, helps to explain why Freeland broke away. It's not that, he's in favor of deficit spending and she's not. I mean, she was, there when they were running these massive budgets over the last few years. But more and more, it's kind of, like the GST tax break.
Yep.
Everybody knows it's a crass political move to try and buy votes.
Yep.
And it's becoming more and more obvious. He's becoming more and more desperate to save his own ass. And obviously, Trudeau's become a toxic brand.
Yeah.
So you see the rats are fleeing the ship. And of course, they're probably setting up themselves for a future run. Like Mark Carney, for example, he was trying to get in.
Yeah.
It seems like at first he accepted the finance portfolio.
Yeah.
Because he had that meeting with Freeland. He says, "You're out." And he told her, "We're putting Carney in." Turns out Carney didn't take it.
Didn't accept the job.
Yeah, and he's smart, I think, from his own perspective. But they're setting themselves up to run themselves. But all of this indicates this is a government that has lost all authority. All authority. And if he does run in the election, whenever that happens, because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when the government falls, they're going to be running with an absolutely toxic leader who everybody hates. You mentioned the by-election was somewhere in BC.
Cloverdale Langley, yeah.
Yeah. That used to pass back and forth between the Liberals and the Conservatives. I think the Liberals took it.
Yeah, they had
in 2021. The Conservatives it's supposed to be a competitive riding, and the Conservatives took 66% of the vote. I think you're going to see that repeated in a lot of ridings, and I think you're looking at a massacre.
Yep.
Like you wrote the article on, the decline of liberalism.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. It's going to be a massacre. Right.
Yeah, the Liberal Party is known as the natural governing party of the country. This is the state of the Canadian establishment. It's in an absolutely lamentable state with a hated leader who doesn't seem to be stepping down. But yeah, lots of calls for him to resign. I guess, yeah, are they going to go... We mentioned this. The NDP have now said that they're going to vote no confidence. The Parliament is on recess until January 29th. So if all three other parties... This is a minority government, so if all three other parties say they're going to vote no confidence at the first opportunity, I don't know when that will be. That will probably be in like the first or second week of February. That means we'll have an election 3 months later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are they going to have Justin Trudeau as their leader walking into this election
Mm-hmm.
with the Conservatives far ahead? Some polls put them close to 50% in the polls.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be an absolute bloodbath, especially because the NDP is seen to be complicit.
Mm-hmm.
They were united with them in the supply and confidence agreement. It's basically a coalition in all but name.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been supporting them ever since they broke it, actually. That's
Mm-hmm.
what's been keeping the government alive.
Mm-hmm.
So now that Jagmeet Singh he's joined the party a little late. He switched his position. Now he's saying he'll vote no
Yeah.
confidence. I'm not sure that's going to play in his favor. But yeah, this looks like it doesn't look good for the Liberal Party. It looks like, yeah, like we said, Donald Trump's coming in January 20th. Do you think he's not going to be making inflammatory posts over the next month?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he's going to wait for the Liberal Party to get a new leader if Justin Trudeau resigns?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is an absolute, like we see in many countries.
Mm-hmm.
I think we just see in like G7 nations like Canada, France, Germany, they have governmental crisis. 3 of the 7 G7 nations have governmental crises.
Yeah,
This
if they have a government at all.
yeah, exactly. This is the last thing that the capitalist class wants. And actually, if you read the statements from the Chamber of Commerce, all of the big business associations, they're freaking out. They're
Mm-hmm.
panicking. They're like, "What are you doing? Like,
Mm-hmm.
get your act together." But that's not always how. Yeah, well, while this is a capitalist government, and the liberals do serve, they defend the interests of the capitalist system. You then have the individual interests of the politicians that sometimes get in the way of things,
Yeah.
like we've seen around the world. So,
Well, the immediate thing that comes to mind is Biden,
yeah, it's
right?
a similar thing. Yeah,
It's what the bourgeoisie wants, they may not necessarily get.
yeah,
Because I'm sure they're looking at Trudeau right now and thinking, listen, this guy is going to destroy everything. He's not stable, he's not popular, he's doing all these giveaways, which, if you're a businessman in Canada, you'd rather that money be sent to you, not be sent in checks to whatever, 18 million Canadians or whatever it is. But like you said, there's also the role of the individual in history. And despite the interests of the ruling class, Trudeau might cling on. Because to be honest, this guy, I mean, obviously we can't go into his head, but he reminds me a lot of Biden.
stubborn. Yeah,
Stubborn, prideful. Yeah, we were talking the other day about how apparently he had a interaction with Kathleen Wynne. If you remember, that was the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party.
yeah,
Who was equally unpopular, maybe more unpopular, stayed on as leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, and absolutely decimated that party in the elections. I think they lost official party status. He spoke to her recently and said, "You're my role model. You're my inspiration."
okay,
I mean, this is not a guy who's in touch with reality. It's more and more he's become totally detached from the situation, and more he's looking to safeguard his own interests. So it's hard to say. We can't, as Marxists, we can have a general perspective, but what we can't account for is the decisions of this or that individual.
yeah. So following up from that, if we step back from the particulars and we look at the general situation, then we can't predict the actions of every individual. Obviously, certain things are more likely than others. We could bet on some things. Maybe is he going to resign? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, got to look at the general situation. Either way, this government is finished.
Yeah.
This government is finished because the other 3 parties are going to vote no confidence. So whatever Trudeau chooses to do, whether he resigns or not, and he could stay on as leader, and that would pretty much be guaranteed bloodbath at the polls. Maybe they'd lose more seats than they did in the Orange Wave in 2011 when they were reduced down to 30-something seats. I don't know. We'll see. But if they switch leaders, that will be a difficult venture because Trump will be in. There'll be a lot of things happening. They'll need a stable hand on the wheel while they're trying to shift leaders, and then the government's being voted out, and that will trigger an election right away. So either way, the government's finished. Whether or not they sail in, whether or not they go into the election with Trudeau as a leader is another matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's not actually like the Biden situation in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that there isn't an obvious
Mm-hmm.
person to fall. It would have been Freeland,
Mm-hmm.
but he stabbed her in the back and she's denounced him publicly. So that
Mm-hmm.
would be a bit, maybe they're able to do that. I don't know. But yeah, the situation is they're finished. Either way, they're going to lose. If the polls, it looks like the polls, I don't see them reversing here.
Yeah.
Like Poilievre looks like he's gonna run into the election and win a massive majority.
Mm-hmm.
The Conservatives win an absolute huge majority, well over 200 seats probably. And yeah, I guess that leads to the question of, we talked a little bit about Pierre Poilievre already. What would a Poilievre government look like? I guess we should address that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are probably looking at it like a Canadian Trump. It's a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe people on the left might get a little depressed about that. He's going to come in and just attack everyone or something. But yeah, what would a Poilievre government look like?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard to say. It's hard to say definitely, because if you listen to some of these liberal commentators, you think it's going to be the second edition of Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
When Poilievre gets in, I think that's a slight exaggeration, to put it mildly. He's playing a very interesting game, because the way he's talking right now is not what you're used to hearing from conservative leaders. I think what he said about the trade unions has been interesting. In the past, they'd say, legislate them back to work, cut their wages, we don't care. Poilievre's taken a slightly different approach here. He didn't comment, as far as I'm aware, on the railway workers being legislated back, or sorry, not being legislated back, being sent back through executive order.
No, he said it was a crisis of the Trudeau government that they couldn't get a deal at the table. Yeah, he was saying that they should have negotiated.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There was that anti-scab legislation.
Yeah, they voted in favor. Yeah.
They voted in favor. So he's playing a game. I guess right populism is the word. He's trying to position himself as, we are the voice of the working class.
He said his view on unions has evolved.
Okay.
And he's pledging to not pass any anti-union legislation if elected.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Very weird for the Conservative Party. Like, they were the party of big business and anti-union, kind of libertarians usually.
Yeah, and I think they're taking a page from Trump. Is that what brought Trump to office? So that obviously, Trump is an enemy of the working class. He's, a billionaire, real estate mogul, but he uses the language of the working class. He positions himself as a defender of the working class. He sounds like an ordinary guy, which is not what you get from the Democrats, which is not what you get from the sanctimonious liberals. But the fact is, would he actually serve the interests of the working class? No. Absolutely not. That at the end of the day, the conservatives, like the liberals, are a party of big business. And in a way, he's kind of put himself in a dangerous position, because like Trump, he's created these enormous expectations from working class people. We're going to be a pro-trade union government. We're going to, lift the wages of Canadian workers. We're going to solve the housing crisis. We're going to get it built, and so on and so forth. Of course, he's been very silent as to how he's actually going to do any of that.
Yep.
The fact is, he's going to inherit the same economic crisis that Trudeau has. And he's going to be, facing the same crisis from Trump that Trudeau is facing. And I think from day one, this is going to be a government of crisis. He's not going to have very much room to maneuver. In the past, the economy was booming in the way past, the Second World War period, post-Second World War period. They could give concessions. That's not the case today. Like you said, you've got a collapsing economy, collapsing productivity, a burgeoning trade war. How's he going to do all these things in this context? He's going to build millions of homes. He's going to lift people's wages. He's going to end the homelessness crisis. He's going to end the drug crisis. I highly, highly doubt that. this is going to be a government of crisis from day one.
Yeah, I think that hits the nail on the head. This will not be a government that will have an extended honeymoon of years. Kind of like the first few years of the Trudeau government, he was still quite popular. Then he had a bump with the COVID thing, but this government is not going to be a popular government because they've promised the moon. This government has not run on, or sorry, this is not this government. The Conservative Party is not presenting themselves, at least, as a government that is going to implement massive cuts in the public sector. They're criticizing deficits, but they're not saying what they're going to do about it. So they're not saying they're going to lay off tens of thousands of workers. They're not saying that they're going to make cuts in healthcare and education. They're not even saying they're going to lower the corporate tax rate.
Yeah.
Which from the standpoint of the capitalist class, they kind of need something to make Canada more competitive. Make it attract foreign investment, or in Chrystia Freeland's words, fight for capital investment. That's what she said in her letter when she resigned. They're not willing to say exactly what they're going to do because it would be massively unpopular. So Poilievre, and like all right populists, they don't say exactly what they really want to do, because if they did, it would be hugely unpopular. The working class is bigger than it has ever been.
Yeah.
And also one thing is the consciousness of the working class. The mood is actually anger. They're angry. Workers are pissed off because our lives have been getting worse. It's been harder to make ends meet. Trade union workers are mad. They've had their right to strike violated by Justin Trudeau. They've had this new sneaky way this year happen with a number of unions. The most recent one, the postal workers, where they punt it to this. They use this convoluted 107 in the labor code that allows, or apparently it doesn't. I don't think it actually allows them to do it, to punt it to this Canadian Industrial Relations Board to put an end to a strike without a debate, without even a vote.
Yeah.
So the right to strike basically doesn't exist. But unionized workers are mad. The postal workers union picket lines, which we were present on across the country, were really militant.
Yeah.
Rank and file workers. There was a mood of defiance. Workers wanted to defy the law. That is what was happening this strike. That is actually a big development, I think. There's a radicalization of the working class happening. So Poilievre is coming. I think, we say never predict elections, but this one looks pretty clear.
Yeah.
A lot can happen. You'd have to have something pretty big to happen to have Poilievre not win the election. But yeah, he'd come in with a majority, but a majority facing an absolutely hopeless situation, with an economy teetering on the brink, dealing with a trade war with the biggest trading partner, a huge trading partner. And what's he going to do? He's going to be really stuck, and he hasn't promised any of this right-wing attacks, right? So if he does do it, there will be immediate sense of betrayal. There'll be an immediate sense of betrayal. And it'll be very unpopular. If he does go through with or if he doesn't go through with the attacks, the situation will continue to deteriorate economically. So that is the situation under capitalism. I did want to actually touch on one thing first, that none of this was inevitable. The rise of Poilievre as the opposition to Trudeau, and him capitalizing on the anger with his right populist talking points about the working class. He's talking about the working class. He's going to fight for the working class against the financial elites, against the, whatever, similar to Trump. None of this was inevitable, much like Trump was not inevitable. Trump 2.0 was not inevitable. This is only happening because the left is in crisis. We already mentioned Jagmeet Singh and the NDP a bit, but that is the main representative of the mainstream left. And they've completely capitulated to the liberals. They're only under immense pressure retracting support for this hated government and are entirely associated with them.
Yeah.
So, and Poilievre has a Trump type catchphrase he uses, calls him sellout Singh.
Right.
I think that actually makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. Actually, in the Cloverdale-Langley election, A bunch of the NDP vote went to the Conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
I think almost
Mm-hmm.
half of it. It eroded. They lost a whole bunch of votes, and the Conservative gained, not just from the Liberals losing votes, but from the NDP losing
Yeah.
votes.
I think the Conservatives also now have the trade union vote.
They
I
do.
can't remember
They're
the last time, if ever, that was the
much
case.
like in the US,
Yeah,
because it's this right populist phenomenon.
yeah.
So I guess to round that off, this does not mean that there's a shift to the right in the population. It means that a sector of the working class, for lack of a better alternative, is attracted to the right populist talking points of Poilievre,
Mm-hmm.
which he will not be able to deliver on. He will immediately have a problem on his hands,
Mm-hmm.
and workers will be very angry. You could see this could be a government that would be hit with a crisis immediately and be very unpopular. And you could have, if they do try to offload the cost of the crisis onto the backs of the unions of the working class, you could have a huge mobilization
Yeah.
against the government. And yeah, I guess that is why we are not depressed
Mm-hmm.
about the situation as revolutionary communists.
Mm-hmm.
We know that none of these political parties really represent the working class. None of these shenanigans and backroom dealings and stuff will actually have any positive outcome for the working class. It's just varying degrees of horrible capitalist politicians. Even, to be honest, even the NDP, for example. But yeah, really, the hope that we can have is that the capitalist system in Canada is declining.
Mm-hmm.
It is declining, and this necessitates, at some point or another, in some shape or form, attacks on the working class.
Mm-hmm.
And those attacks, and we've already seen attacks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even something like inflation is like
Mm-hmm.
almost an attack in another name on the living standards.
Well, just on a point you raised earlier, this, are we seeing a shift to the right? Actually, we wrote a good article in the last issue of the paper.
Yeah.
Are the youth right wing?
Mm-hmm.
Because a majority of young people say they're going to vote for Poilievre, like you pointed out. But the fact is, I think that the defining feature of this period is not a shift to the right per se. It's a collapse of the center.
Yeah.
It's a collapse of liberalism. It's a turn away from the establishment. That's the mood. Like, you talk to any young person, you talk to any working class person. They hate the politicians, they hate the banks, they hate the corporations. They want somebody who speaks for them.
Yeah.
And the fact is, the reason why Poilievre and Trump are eating up so much of the vote and getting the support they are is because, for lack of a better word, they have the cojones that the left doesn't have.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of Trump supporters said they would have voted for Sanders if given the opportunity. But then what happened? Sanders capitulated, folded himself into the Democratic Party, and there goes Sanders, right? In Canada, it's even worse. Like Singh,
you don't even have a Sanders here.
I don't even know, like you said, left. I don't even know if we'd call him left wing. He's almost indistinguishable from the Liberal Party.
A good example of that is Trump was threatening, saying he wants all the NATO members to meet the target of 2% of GDP spent on military spending.
Mm-hmm.
What did Singh say? What did not just Singh, all the NDP provincial leaders said the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very important.
Yeah.
Yes, we should spend more on bombs and guns. And are they paying attention to what's happening?
Yeah.
They're sending all these bombs and guns over to Ukraine in an absolute bloodbath.
Yeah.
They're basically giving them to Israel to genocide the Palestinians.
Yeah.
This is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
This is what the left is in favor of.
And then you wonder why people turn to the right.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's telling for me, how I know it's not a turn to the right, is what's happening in the States. And not Trump, but what's his name? Luigi Mangione.
Yes.
The poll came out there. I don't know if you saw the poll. It was something like...
It's almost 40% support him or something.
Well, yeah, 40% of young people who say... And just put this into context. This is a guy who, in broad daylight, shot a CEO in the back of the head. 40%. He's the most popular man in America at the moment. Now, of course, these aren't the methods that we put forward as Marxists, but we can understand and empathize 100% with those young people who who were like, yeah, because we've been screwed for, decades and decades. They've been screwing us over. And now they know how it feels. They've been killing us for years.
Yeah.
Now they know how it feels. He's incredibly popular. That's the mood amongst not just American youth. I think it's the same amongst Canadian youth. That's the mood that exists. It's an incredibly angry mood. They hate the establishment. They hate the corporations. They hate the politicians. That's not reason to be pessimistic. That's reason to be incredibly optimistic about building something.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to end off our discussion, because we have just launched this year in May a new political party in Canada, the Revolutionary Communist Party, and we are precisely fighting to revive the fighting spirit of the Canadian working class, those militant traditions, to fight for a way out of this capitalist nightmare that's just getting worse and worse every year. Anyone who thinks, oh yeah, this is just a temporary phenomenon, things will get better. I think Trudeau maybe gave at the early days probably gave people a little bit of hope that things were going to get better under him. We've seen the results of this. It is not getting better. It's getting worse. This is what capitalism has to offer us. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we as revolutionary communists, we reject this system. We stand for a working class alternative. We believe that Canada is a wealthy country. There's more than enough wealth to fund all the programs that the working class need, all the benefits, good wages, good living conditions, affordable place to live. But yeah, we have to start from the standpoint of building a new political formation, building a new political force that can actually bring that into existence. And that's what we're trying to do with the Revolutionary Communist Party. If you are interested in our analysis, if you like what you heard today and you want to get involved and you want to help us to fight against this rotten system, I encourage you to get in touch. You can reach out to us at marxist.ca/join and sign the join form. We have branches of the Revolutionary Communist Party that have sprouted up all over the country in most major cities, even in many small towns. So yes, please get in touch with us. We also have we have sales on. We produce Marxist theory. We produce books. We have a Christmas sale that's happening, a holiday special right now. I encourage you to go to our website. You can get your Marxist literature on marxist.ca. Yeah, and we also have our party. We are facing these big obstacles, and we do not have big corporate donors. We only rely on people like yourself, working class people, students, young people that are sick of this system and want to fight back. So we are currently running a winter appeal campaign. You can also find that. There's a banner on our website with that. I think we've raised almost $160,000 so far, and the goal is to raise $175,000 to hire some new full-time revolutionary organizers in Canada. Yes, so I encourage you to get in touch with us to help us build the forces of revolutionary communism in Canada, to fight against this rotten system.